Again, I encourage you to ask questions. No such thing as a dumb question here. Like I said yesterday, this is not an opportunity you get every day to actually talk to people like this in an open forum and ask them anything you want, within reason, of course. And I'll give Dan just a couple of minutes to explain who you are and where you're from and what you do and so forth. So.
Yeah, thanks, Larry. So Dan Scally, Senior Director of Strategy at Dragos. We are an OT cybersecurity company. That's all we do. We don't focus on the IT side. As Mike mentioned, we have a technology that essentially can be deployed on an industrial network to show you, what you have, to show you what the vulnerabilities might be, if you have any threats or compromise in the environment, and then most importantly, what to do about it. So we do kind of lead with our technology solution. We also have, as Mike mentioned, some threat intelligence capabilities where we're studying and understanding where the attacks are and how they work so that we can better defend against them, and also help customers along the way with their journey with some of our professional services to check in on what's going on in the technology and maybe do assessments or other things to help customers along the way. So that's just a brief description of kind of who I am and who Dragos is and our business.
Thanks, Dan. We have Sid Snitkin walking around with a. Do you have a microphone, Sid? Yeah, we have a microphone. Do we have a question to start off? Great.
Yeah, Dan from Dow. Mark, you mentioned something very specific that's near and dear to my heart. You mentioned that you test your disconnect from the corporate networks on a regular basis. Is this an operating discipline that you do regularly? And if so, do operators also understand if and when they should do it? Or is it an automated process to actually keep up with the speed of cyber? Because by the time I call a plant operator and go tell them to pull a cord, game's over.
Well, first off, it's my team that pulls the cord, but we have to tell the operators we're going to do it. So it is one of those scheduled events that we talk to and basically have an opportunity to work with it. It is something that we do. It's actually the board of directors that actually came down from EPCOR, and as I mentioned on Monday at my presentation, the good old days was when they didn't know who the OT guy was, right? And now so often I'm called up to the board of directors to answer questions about, can what happened in the Florida plant actually happen in our water plants, et cetera, right? So those kind of things. So we've included this as something just as a test. It's interesting because one of the things, we did it once, and actually, of course, it depends on how long you do it for. So the first time we did it, we just did it for a period of time to prove that, yeah, the control systems operated. We asked the operators in the control room, did you see any difference? Here are things that could have been a problem for you. Were you doing changes in the plant? And so we let them run for a while without it, and there was no problem. I know on the electricity side of the organization, they're much more tightly integrated with IT, and they weren't in the same position to be able to do what we were able to do on the water side, so we're a little bit different from that perspective. I guess the other part of it was basically we did, interestingly enough, have someone decided they were going to try to pull some copper out of some pipes. And then, of course, they cut the pipe and discovered it was actually a fiber and not a copper, so they didn't actually get what they were after. But they did cut out the network to one of our plants, and it was interesting in the plant discussion because one of the things people couldn't get to was basically standard operating procedures. All those things. We're an ISO-certified plant, so basically ISO certification, and so, of course, you don't want to have any documents lying around that are paper, right? Because as soon as your auditors come in, first thing they go is looking for paper documents, and this paper document isn't up to date, and there's a non-conformance, right? So, of course, everything's online, and, of course, one of the things that the team didn't realize was, gosh, if you lose a connection, if we ever needed to get a standard operating procedure, those are some of the things that we need to do. So now we're in our DMZ, we're actually putting a system in to actually, copy down all the standard operating procedures on a regular basis, keep them up to date there. Normally, yeah, if you come in and audit, no, we don't use those, we're using the corporate systems and stuff. But in the event of an incident like this where you can't get to those procedures, you don't have to send the operations manager home with a stick to go get the procedures so he can bring them back in, right? So,
if I could maybe just add an interesting point to that. One of the things that we observed during COVID was, a lot of the board level conversations are typically, oh, don't worry, it's air gapped, right? Or there's, not connectivity or things like that. And then, even at kind of the very highest non-technical level during COVID, when there was remote operations of facilities. Even a non-technical person can understand, well, someone must have, connectivity into that. So that was actually an interesting thing that happened over the past few years that really exposed that, no, it's not disconnected, right? Because there is different connectivity. It's surprising to me still, having various executive level conversations that some of the stuff that's communicated upwards that things aren't connected.
I don't know the regulations you have to deal with, but this issue of not having anything on paper can be a problem. I at least know one case where there was a major attack, and we had a detailed contingency plan, of course, on the system that was no longer accessible. So everybody had basically reconstruct the contingency plan they had detailedly worked on 6 months earlier because nobody had access to it.
Do we have another question?
Hello. John Cusimano with Deloitte. I think my question is largely to Stuart, but welcome feedback from anybody on the panel. Stuart, really appreciate the cyber safety methodology. That's a subject that's near and dear to my heart, the integration of, or the convergence of security and safety, particularly in OT. The question I had for you, because I haven't read your, I've heard about your methodology, I haven't studied it, but I wanted to know if you're familiar with work done by the ISA, International Society of Automation, and IEC for the 62443 standard that also offers up a cyber safety methodology that sounds fairly similar in looking at threats and vulnerabilities and consequences and actually walking through the actual system architecture.
Well, one of the things I'm not sure if I say it out loud is it really important to you to have a methodology. I mean, obviously, we'd love to use ours, but the point being is most organizations have no methodology, or at least no systematic methodology. So the first thing we recommend. And I don't want to go through the history, but we developed it based upon the work that my colleague, Professor Nancy Levson at MIT in the aeronautics department did, working with the aerospace industry over about 2 decades. So this methodology, or variations on it, have been around for quite a while. They had not previously been applied to cybersecurity. They were mostly safety mechanisms. That when a safety accident happened that should not have happened. They did a detailed investigation of the Challenger space shuttle, and a lot of things that people didn't realize behind the scenes went on. So we took it and we adapted it. So there are others out there that have similar methodologies.
Is it a publicly available methodology?
Well, yes, we have a number of papers on what we did, and she called it STAMP, S-T-A-M-P. She's been writing about it for about 2 decades, so there's a whole literature of it, mostly applied to preventing or analyzing accidents.
One thing I'll also just add is, there's definitely benefit to using standards and methodology. One thing even just more simple than that we found to be very effective is just asking, what does a bad day look like for your organization, and what is it that you're trying to protect, right? And these are like fairly simple, basic questions, but really kind of going through that exercise of understanding, what the worst impacts are and then working backwards from there can be a way to just kind of very simply understand what it is you're trying to protect, and then sort of walk through the different controls that can shut that down. So there's, I guess if you were to tie it to a methodology, there's, attack for ICS that kind of goes through and enumerates the different, types of offensive strategies that an attacker might use, and you're really just looking to make sure that, through that process of them getting an initial foothold to eventually like delivering a payload that has some sort of impact on your industrial operation, that you're trying to cut that off every step of the way and have as much coverage as possible.
I just want to elaborate a little bit on what Dan said, very important. I think many of us, and it's a real challenge, you almost have to kind of flip your thinking upside down. Most of the time we're thinking about how things should work. We often don't think about how things could work. Well, what if someone did this? We say, well, no one would ever do that. But what if they did that? And this is something that we don't normally do. It requires a very change the way our thinking, because that's what the bad guys do. They'll do something you never anticipated.
Yeah, we're big proponents of things like cyber HAZOP, cyber PHA, risk-based analysis, The attack framework is really useful, and I know you guys have a really cool thing where you can map, TTPs of some of the major advanced persistent threat groups with, the different aspects of the attack framework. So if you're not familiar with that, I would urge you to go out and do research on all those things and talk to Stuart about, their safety-based analysis approach too. We've always felt that safety and cybersecurity are really closely intertwined. I mean, cybersecurity at the end of the day, especially when we're talking about industry and the process industries, is really, at the end of the day about safety. Do we have any other questions from the audience here? Sid, did you have a question you want to
Yeah, I
ask?
got a ton. I slept really well last night, so.
All right, go, let's go.
I'll give you a warning, but I'll let everybody else talk first.
Yeah, Mark Duck with Shell. So I've talked to John about this, this intersection between cyber and safety, and I was thinking about your safety, your cyber safety talk, but it didn't to me appear to have the intersection with actual safety. It looked like an analysis of the IT kit basically, and how this cyber attack could unfold. Now, we've been studying this for a little while, and we've decided that this year we're going to actually make a change to our LOPA process, which that's a safety analysis process we use in our risk assessment matrix. It would be for what we call our major accident hazard risk levels. There's different risk levels, and for those that are the highest risk or that high risk category, we're going to look at our safety barriers, right? So if you're not familiar with, HAZOP, basically it's an analysis of what are the hazards in your environment, safety hazards, and they don't assess consequential business loss type of incidents, like the plant gets shut down, but nothing was damaged. We're talking about harm to people, damage to assets, harm to environment, harm to community. Those are the 4 categories that we use in Shell. Now, the barriers that they pick to protect against those kinds of incidents are, valves like pressure relief valves to release pressure. In one of the big categories, they call them safety instrumented systems. Now, those are running on microprocessors, running software, and typically on the network, right? And there's a variety of other barriers they're picking these days that are essentially just like that. They're what we consider cyber vulnerable, right? So now you have that intersection of safety and cyber, where now you're picking a safety barrier that is cyber vulnerable. And if all the barriers you pick to prevent some sort of incident are cyber vulnerable, and the initiating events are cyber vulnerable, now you've got a completely hackable situation that can cause harm to people, damage to your asset, et cetera, right? And so that when I think of cyber and safety intersection, that's what I'm thinking about. And we're actually going to update our LOPA process this year to where we're going to cause these safety teams to consider what I just described, and then they have to figure out what to do about this fully cyber, vulnerable set of barriers that they've potentially picked, right? But any additional thoughts on that? I'm always interested to hear thoughts on where that safety and cyber life cycle intersect.
Great question. Yeah, that's great. Thanks.
I would just say, specific to the SIS design, I would hone in immediately on the designs where the DCS and the SIS are riding on the same network, right? Which some vendors have kind of moved to that. If you look back at a really specific example of the Trisis incident back in 2018 at a Saudi Arabian petrochemical facility, the attackers basically came in through the internet because of a network misconfiguration, were able to compromise the DCS, and then as they were trying to reprogram the SIS, it tripped and did what it was supposed to do, and kind of shut the plant down. And it was only later they realized that this was a cybersecurity failure and not a safety failure, and that the attackers were actually able to kind of pivot all the way from the internet down to the SIS. So, but as you outline that example, that's one of the things that kind of popped immediately into my head of being able to kind of trace, what are the network routes. And I think, similar to the COVID example that I gave, the first reaction is, oh no, you could never do that, right? Or that's the safety system. But to really get into a very detailed analysis, at the IT level, right, or at the networking level of where can you go from point A to point B.
Well, can you hold up for a sec, because we can't hear you. If you can get the microphone, we'll all be able to hear you.
So while the microphone is traveling, let me make a quick comment back to something Larry said earlier regarding Swiss cheese. One of the things you have to consider in any kind of methodology used, if you look at a situation in isolation, you say, well, this thing could happen, but that won't cause any problem, unless this also happens. Now, in the natural world with safety, we're dealing with kind of probability. The odds of two independent events happening at the same time is pretty small, so you can kind of discount it. If you're dealing with a cyber attack, these two unlikely things could happen at the same time. So you have to be able to not just look at a single event, but look at what combination events could cause if they happen at the same time. I'm not sure if that made sense, but that's a key difference between safety caused by natural effects and a cyber attack which is deliberately planned.
Yeah, good
So,
point.
so going back on the safety, because it's interesting, I think there is some similarity what they want to do with what they have done with 61508 and what they're actually going to do with what's mentioned before, 62443. So, for example, if you design according to 62443, is a lot of the same things you need to do on 61508, correct? So you need to make sure that your firmware has followed certain procedures, your documentation, the way you manufacture stuff as well. So that is actually what I think what they're trying to do with that 62443 is both from a design, but also from a deployment perspective. And I think they're taking pieces out of what they learned with 61508. Of course, it's a little bit different, but I think that's what they're trying to get also that sort of, at the end, certification or level done. Yeah, so.
Yeah, for those not familiar, 61508 is the IEC standard for safety, and it's the umbrella standard. My understanding is that 61511 is more focused on. Yeah. Any other questions? Yep. Yes, sir.
Yeah, hi, Jim Montague, Control Magazine. I just was wondering if Mike and Mark could, maybe tell somebody else who wants to do the same things that they did, somebody who's not as far along the learning curve, what should be on their to-do list to begin to implement or develop and implement a cybersecurity program? What steps would you tell them to take?
And I understand Jim's a writer, an editor, so he, what? Allegedly. But anyhow, no, and so he likes to write articles to give advice to people, so I'm just qualifying this question.
Well, one of the things that we did first, like I said, was I looked at the staff we had. I mean, my bad, I'm sorry. We looked at what was out there. What were our threats? What was our risk of being exposed? Those are the two first things you look at, and then I looked at my staff. And that's when you go back to upper management and you ask them, if you want this, this, or this, I need this, this, and this. And if management's behind you, if like my company, the people were behind us for it, they wanted it, they made sure we had the resources to get where, to improve our posture. So, what did they want? They wanted nothing to ever happen, ever. We don't ever want a security breach ever. That's what they wanted. I said, I can't promise that, but we can get pretty close if you give me this, this, and this. I needed resources for staffing. I needed a budget. I needed a budget to bring in consultants, because if I'm not sure about other companies, but upper management never listens to lower management unless you have a consultant tell them. And it's funny, the consultant says the exact same thing lower management said. So, what did we put in place? A passive monitoring system with a SOC solution. Because
Was the SOC in-house or contracted?
the SOC is with a contracted company. We're not like a Nextera who has the budget to have their own threat people, to have their own, I mean, I was talking to a guy the other day from Nextera. He has 11 people just on his cybersecurity team. I said, I've got 4 people. I've got 4 people to do everything. So you kind of have, if you're smaller, you have to look outside. So that's what we did.
When you mentioned about the multiple hats, so what jobs and tasks, cybersecurity tasks are they doing?
Well, my network team is also the security team. So my network guys go to cybersecurity classes. They get, a couple of them have gotten certs in cybersecurity. My system guys go to system classes. They go to CEH courses. You know, we pay for them to do that. So everybody's getting the training. The upper management was committed to that. So that's what we've been able to do. Now that doesn't stop them from, you know, a company like Siemens coming along and throwing a ton of money at them. So,
Thanks for that. I think we
but
have
that's
another-
just our,
Oh.
yeah.
I guess on our front, a lot of it's been driven. We have an internal audit as an organization, and an internal audit group that goes around and audits everything in the organization, from cybersecurity to safety, especially all those kind of areas. And one of the things they came in with a number of years ago now was basically they were going to audit us, and they brought in, of course, an IT audit standard, right? So they're going to bring in IT, and they started to say, this is what we're going to audit you against. And I looked at this and said, well, this doesn't apply in my world. I mean, these standards are not applicable. And they said, so what does apply? And so basically we went back against, at the time, this is probably 10 years ago now, NIST 800 standard, 82, we were trying to use at the time the ISA standard, but it was still being underdeveloped. It was underdeveloped, it was still being developed at that point. So ISA 99, which became the 62443 IEC standard now. But we were being driven by looking at those kind of things. But we'd always been involved in looking at what does the cybersecurity look like. I'll always remember 15 years ago when I went to my first SCADA, to be certified as a SCADA information specialist when it comes to cybersecurity. The course happened to be in Las Vegas, okay? And so here I am going to my director of asking, can I go to a course in Las Vegas, okay? Well, he had to actually escalate that to senior VP approval level before we could actually get to go to the course. And the only reason we really got to go was at the end of the week, you had to pass an exam with a 75% average to actually get certified. And of course, that was part of the requirement with me going to the course. So I guess over time, we've been looking at these at different aspects. So being driven by standards, being driven by internal audit to actually say, you know, how are you doing against the standards that are out there? But the interesting thing, I think, is we transitioned from auditors where you're auditing against the standard to say, are you doing the right things? And those are all important. That'll get you so far. But actually bringing in external groups that are going to do, we brought in a group basically that are a bunch of hackers, right? So they're going to do the things that basically somebody who's going to try to get into your system is going to happen. And it was brought in by corporate IT to start with. But it's interesting, of course, you know, I think any corporate IT guy who's responsible for security, when the guy who came in actually reaches across the table and gives him his password, which is like 12 characters long with all kinds of things, and says, here's your password, they got the attention of corporate security, right? And so we actually use the same group for ourselves. When we put in our SIM, our operational technology SIM and our monitoring center, we brought them in to do a live fire test on the SIM. And they come in and do those crazy things like, you know, they'll throw a blanket over top of your barbed wire fence and crawl over top and jump in and plug into your network to show you that, yeah, you do have a vulnerability here, right? This is possible to do it. So those are things that when you go against standards, you don't typically find that kind of stuff in standards, right? You find different things. And so we were being driven, I guess, by the internal requirements as far as standards, audits, trying to do the right things, by looking at external groups coming in, evaluating us and as to where we were in the maturity level and looking at doing the right things. And again, hoping that, you know, we listen to the folks on the electricity side who are under the NERC CIP agreements, don't want to go there. What we want to do is try to protect our systems. We want to do the right things, implement the right level of technology. I don't have a lot of staff either. I'm under the same pressures. So we don't want to just be checking boxes, but we want to say, are we making the water production for this city safe? And I guess going back to the question around On our wastewater side, I talked about the water side, but I have a team at the wastewater plant as well where we have hydrogen, H2S gas in our digesters, right? And of course, like a lot of wastewater plants, like we built down by the river a long time ago when there was no houses around the place, but of course now it's a wonderful place and everybody's built houses around. So we have all the challenges of odor and stuff, but we also have the challenge of saying these digesters have H2S gas in them. There's a whole level of issues related to them being there as opposed to doing. So we did a process, took our process safety team and went through a HAZOP basically and did a HAZOP, took the HAZOP methodology and added to it the cybersecurity aspect to look at saying, okay, from a cybersecurity perspective, what are the things that could happen to a digester if we were hacked by somebody or if we had malware on the system and our system shut down, what would that mean? For us. And we don't have any SIS-based safety instrument system, actually. We're using Emerson Delta V as our DCS system in the wastewater plant. But we have gone through that whole process, HAZOP, and we have identified what are the highest risks within the wastewater treatment plant and what are the things that we need to be concerned about beyond just the odor, which is what the customers around us really care about. So.
I think the last couple of questions kind of raise an important area, which I think we're spending a few minutes on, and maybe some of you can contribute to. And that's the whole issue of how do small and medium enterprises deal with cyber threats. I mean, large corporations are clearly not flawless, as we know, but they have massive resources they can deploy. Obviously, one route, of course, is go to third parties like Dragos, and he'll talk a bit more about that. But I'm curious, I'm seeing some motion regarding getting the government more involved. I often use the analogy. If enemy aircraft were flying over your plants, dropping bombs on them, you'd expect the Air Force or the artillery people to try to shoot them down. If the bad guys are doing the same kind of damage to your plant, but doing it through the internet, basically you're on your own to a large extent. So there's one question is what either can or is or could the government do to help, number one. The other one, which I don't hear a lot of talk about, and I don't know whether any of you are involved in it or not, but many companies have cyber insurance. And the insurance companies, for obvious reasons, are ratcheting up their requirements to you, kind of nudging you along or doing their own kind of audits. So there's a number of things that, how do small enterprises deal with these issues? Either the panel or maybe some of you could give your experiences.
Yeah, that's a good point. Anybody have a comment on that?
I mean, I guess just maybe I'll take the government piece. One thing, at least in our experience, is one of the most important things government can do is ask industry what they need, right? And often you'll see examples, and not to be overly critical in this forum, but like something like the TSA pipeline standards, right? We're extremely prescriptive, right? To the point where, those on the ground, tasked with maintaining those systems, looked at some of those controls and said, "This is the pipeline's not going to work anymore if we do this, right?" And so, I think that sort of collaborative approach is something that when that happens, the resulting regulatory policy and other things like that can be quite effective.
Yeah, we have a question back here.
Not a question, but a comment. First of all, going back to the comment about consultants, the definition of a consultant is somebody who asks you for your watch and then tells your boss what time it is. But I just wanted to inform those in the room. My name's Eric Cosman. I co-chair the ISA 99 committee. And if you're interested in the confluence of security and cybersecurity and safety, the ISA 84 committee has a document in circulation right now. It's 300 pages long, I'm warning you, but it examines in excruciating detail the subject of safety and security. So it's out for comment as we speak. I think the comment deadline is next week.
Yeah, this is new, right?
Yeah. And so if it's something that you're passionate about, it's something you might want to look up. That's it.
Thanks. Anyone else?
No, well, I'm happy to talk if nobody else is.
Sid, ask a question.
I never
No,
get
we
a
have
chance.
somebody over
See,
here.
I never get a chance to talk.
I think it's a Mark again.
Yeah, Mark Michelle again. On the government question, does anyone know? I mean, I've read some books on like cyber warfare and some of the stuff that NIS does and so forth, and it seems like they are doing something, right? Maybe the frequency of these nation-state attacks or criminal organization attacks might be higher if they weren't doing whatever they're doing. Maybe Dragos, do you have any information on what are they doing?
Well, here in the U.S., you've got DHS and CISA, and they do a ton of great work and have, over many, many years, going back, I'm sure many people in this room have participated in things like ICS JWG, have kind of supported this community in securing control systems. So my commentary was more focused on kind of like regulatory stuff, but there's certainly a ton of resources on the government side, and no matter, I know this is also, from an international perspective, national certs typically have resources and programs and things like that. So here in the U.S., definitely would point to CISA as a place where you can go for resources.
Or I think I misspoke. Maybe I meant NSA, not NIS.
And not to just both the FBI, the Secret Service, a lot of agencies, once again, often have overlaps, often have contradictions, are trying to bring down some of these, because a lot of times the cyber criminals are actually state-sponsored. I mean, it's often like North Korea needs money as well as attacking. So a lot of times the criminal activities also are targeted by the government officials. The trouble is it's kind of scattered, and it's not very coordinated.
Yeah, one of the things I'll maybe highlight is an area where we at Dragos are working with government. So we have a program called Neighborhood Keeper. Essentially, it gives the folks that have deployed our technology the ability to opt in and anonymously share the information that is in their system in terms of the cybersecurity alerts and things like that are coming up. Now, everything stays on premise with them, which is important, but it's obfuscated and anonymized and then sent up where it can be aggregated. So, trusted third parties from governments, like DOE example was our partner in kind of setting this up, have the ability to then ask questions about the whole sector, right, or across all the deployments. So, like, for example, a focus of the government a few years ago was, are there any, Russian products in the electric grid? So, like, the Kaspersky antivirus or something like that. And this gave them the ability to kind of, essentially search for that and ask those questions. That's an example of how you could use something like this to not only see, like, is the sector under attack, but to look and see kind of what's out there. But they don't know who it is, because a big problem for like electric utilities or other end users of opting in is you don't want a bunch of vans rolling up to corporate headquarters, right, when something happens, and maybe it's not really a big concern, or it's not something that you have to disclose from a business perspective. So this kind of helps on both sides to kind of give everyone who participates also has access to this information. So give this sort of situational awareness and community defense, give the government agencies the ability to kind of drill into to real data about what's going on out there without having to need like actual access in to the participants' networks. And that's something that's been kind of really effective in promoting more information sharing.
Who can join that program?
Anyone.
Anyone.
It does
Okay.
require the platform, because it's the technology
okay.
sends
Yeah.
the information up there, but it's anyone who deploys can participate, and then the trusted advisors, which would be the government agencies, would go through an approval process.
Yeah, I'm just asking because I don't think there's enough programs like that out there. I know we have ISACs and stuff. In fact, I just applied to join the ONG ISAC as a consultant, but they tell me it's going to cost us $10,000 to do it.
And
so
ISACs are another example
Yeah,
of a
that
trusted
could be
advisor.
a barrier. Yeah, but we need more of these forums where we can share information. I think that's really important. We got.
It's noon, Larry.
Yeah, well, we got time for one more. If anybody has a question, it's 11:59 right now. If not, I will just say thanks everybody for presenting today. We really appreciate it. We appreciate your insight, and coming all this way to participate, and just let's give them all a round of applause.